The ancient kingdoms whispered of swordsmanship, but fewer still dared to speak of the technique known as the 1 inch of fury. It was not a grand sweep or a blinding flurry. It was the final answer to all conflicts. This legendary skill belonged to a lone wanderer named Ru Jin, a man whose presence was as quiet as the fall of snow, yet whose potential for violence could shatter mountains. Jujin walked the earth with a simple, unadorned iron sword sheathed across his back, its scabbard wrapped tightly in frayed cotton, giving no hint of the lethal blade within. His fame was a paradox. He was known for the one fight he had refused to finish, and the technique he rarely, if ever, allowed to exceed its calculated minimum. Mastery, his late mentor had taught him, was not about how much power one could unleash, but how perfectly one could restrain it. The technique worked by gathering every ounce of ki within the user's body, their life force, their spirit, their very anger, and compressing it into a single point, the sword tip's final inch of travel. Unleashed entirely, the full fury would leave nothing but a crater, consuming the target and the wielder alike in an indiscriminate explosion of energy. Thus, the ultimate test was never the power itself, but the 1 inch of control that held the entirety of that destructive force back from the brink of total release. Ru Jin was traveling through the scorched foothills of the Wuling Mountains when he heard the clamor of conflict echoing through the valley. A small, self-sufficient village, nestled precariously between two towering peaks, was suffering under the brutal tax of the Iron Palm sect. The Iron Palm sect represented everything Ru Jin despised: brute strength without grace, martial might without morality, and power wielded purely for oppression. Their leader in the region was Elder Wei, a man whose hands were literally hardened and darkened by decades of cruel, unrefined internal power. Elder Wei stood in the village square, his massive frame dwarfing the starving villagers, his voice a booming demand for their last meager stores of grain. "We are cultivators of strength," Wei bellowed, his voice echoing off the silent, fear-stricken homes. "The weak must feed the strong, or they cease to exist." One young man, barely more than a boy, stepped forward, his eyes burning with defiant hunger, clutching a small broken shovel as his only defense. Elder Wei didn't bother drawing a weapon, simply extended his huge, calloused hand, coated in the rusty sheen of his inner power. Before the crushing blow could land, a sound cut through the air, not the clash of metal, but the soft hiss of cotton against iron. Jujin had arrived. He stood at the entrance of the square, his worn sword now drawn, resting point down in the dust. "The path of cultivation should bring protection, not predation," Jujin spoke, his voice quiet, yet somehow more commanding than Wei's roar. Elder Wei turned slowly, his small eyes narrowing. He recognized the legendary aura surrounding the stranger, but dismissed the thin frame and simple attire. Another pretentious stick of a swordsman, seeking glory in a peasant village, Wei sneered, his body tensing, ready to shatter the intruder with one palm strike. Jujin took one small step forward, causing the dust beneath his worn boots to shift slightly, as if anticipating a sudden violent displacement. "I am here only to ensure the proper use of martial arts," Jujin replied, his gaze locked on the elder's hardened hands. "You are using a sledgehammer where a sculptor's chisel is required." The elder laughed, a deep, rumbling sound. "Chisels break. Only the iron palm endures," he charged, not bothering with technique, relying solely on unstoppable force. The air cracked as Wei's palm strike rushed toward Jujin, carrying enough kinetic energy to flatten the boy standing nearby. Jujin did not move his feet. He did not dodge, simply lifted his iron sword, not to block, but to intercept the trajectory with the blade's flat side. The impact was deafening. The ground shuddered, and a vortex of wind ripped through the square, scattering dust and debris. Jujin slid back only a foot, his arm trembling visibly, but the sword held fast. The elder's strike was deflected harmlessly into the earth. Elder Wei was shocked, expected the sword to snap, the arm to shatter. He expected the fight to be over with a single, brutal exchange. "You are strong, boy," Wei gasped, pulling his hand back, his iron palm technique failing to find its mark. "But speed is useless against brute force. Strength without purpose is just noise," Ru Jin countered, his breathing already regulated, his ki flowing smoothly despite the massive initial shock. The fight began in earnest. Wei attacked relentlessly, delivering a dizzying array of palm strikes and crushing blows, each aimed at Rujin's head or chest. Rujin danced around the force, never retreating more than necessary, his movements economical, like a piece of silk drifting on a gentle current. He did not look for an opening to strike, but rather for an opening in the elder's control, the subtle lapse that all masters of brute force inevitably suffer. The elder's frustration mounted with every near miss. He was expending enormous energy, yet the swordsman remained frustratingly untouched. In a desperate move, Elder Wei launched his most devastating attack. The mountain-shattering palm aimed not at Rujin, but at the foundations of a nearby home. The goal was simple: force Rujin to break his focus and save the innocent family huddled within the dwelling. Rujin saw the terrible intent. He knew the force of the strike would instantly kill the woman and children inside, turning the ancient stone into shrapnel. He had a fraction of a second to make a decision that demanded both superhuman speed and absolute, terrifying restraint. This was the moment his master's lesson flashed through his mind. Not of how to strike, but of why he had sworn to keep the fury leashed. Jujin, the power is yours to command, but the life you take is never yours to claim casually. Your mastery is measured in 1 inch. He turned his attention from Elder Wei to the devastating wave of ki heading toward the house. He began to draw his own internal power, not outwardly in a grand display, but inwardly, coiling it like a venomous serpent in his lower abdomen. His eyes glowed with an amber light as his entire consciousness narrowed down to the single vibrating tip of his sword. The power gathered was immense. It was the full, unadulterated potential of the 1 inch of fury, enough to not only nullify the palm strike but obliterate the elder instantly. But to use the full power meant the subsequent blast would be uncontrollable, leveling the village along with the iron palm threat. Yujin knew that to save the family, he could not meet the attack with equal force. He had to meet it with precise counterforce. With a speed that transcended human sight, Jujin thrust his sword forward. The movement was barely noticeably short, controlled flick of the wrist. The sword moved only the bare minimum distance, just past the line of defense, intercepting the elder's attack mid-flow, not at the point of impact. The resulting interaction was not an explosion, but a sharp, localized implosion. The elder's mountain-shattering palm vanished, sucked into a vacuum of compressed energy, leaving a clean, circular hole in the air where the force had been. The sword tip had stopped exactly 1 inch short of its full destructive extension. The air pressure in the village square changed instantaneously. The villagers felt a sudden, profound silence, as if the sound had been stolen. Elder Wei staggered back, his expression morphing from rage to pure animal terror. His entire body felt empty, his internal power drained and nullified. What madness is that?" he whispered, staring at his hands, which now looked pale and normal, the dark, powerful calluses dissolving. Jujin pulled the blade back, the movement as smooth and quiet as its deployment. He had successfully neutralized the threat with a fraction of his power.
Ow!
But the fight was not over.
Ow!
The elder, driven by desperation, screamed and lunged, pulling a hidden dagger from his belt, relying on base brutality. This was the true test for Rujin, fighting an opponent who had abandoned honor and technique, reverting to blind instinct. This required not the ultimate technique, but a simple, clean intervention to protect the villagers, who were now watching in stunned silence. Jujin flowed past the dagger's clumsy arc. He used the flat of his blade to strike the pressure point on the elder's wrist, disarming him instantly. Then, with an almost tender motion, he tapped the elder's temple with the dull crossguard of his sword, a precise and non-lethal blow. Elder Wei fell, his massive body collapsing into the dust with a heavy thud, unconscious but unharmed. The battle was over. The villagers rushed out, not to celebrate, but to look at the swordsman with a mixture of relief and awe. The young man who had first tried to defy the elder stepped forward, bowing deeply, his shovel falling forgotten to the ground. "Wanderer," the young man said, his voice trembling, "your skill is magnificent. Why did you not finish him? That man has tormented us for years." Jujin sheathed his sword, the soft clack of iron against cotton, sounding like the final word of an ancient poem. To use the power of the 1 inch of fury to take a life is to surrender the very mastery that forged it, Jujin explained calmly. The difference between a master and a killer is that one knows how to take a life, and the other knows why to spare it. He retrieved the elder's dagger and tossed it into the nearest well, symbolically removing the source of future violence. The swordsman spent the rest of the day in the village, not boasting of his skill, but helping the people repair the house that had nearly been destroyed. He shared their thin gruel, listened to their quiet worries, and saw in their eyes the simple, enduring spirit he had fought to protect. He realized that this was the true reward of his mastery, the right to protect the fragile, messy life he had once dismissed in his pursuit of perfect solitary power. As dusk settled, he took the unconscious elder away and tied him securely atop a wild, uncooperative donkey. He then inscribed a message on the elder's back using ash and oil, detailing his crime and ensuring his disgrace throughout the martial world. He set the donkey loose toward the main road leading to the Iron Palm sect's distant fortress. Jujin did not wait for thanks or praise. The moment the sun dipped below the Wuling peaks, casting the valley in purple shadow, he prepared to leave. He understood that his purpose was to act as a point of balance, a necessary force to correct the imbalance of power, then vanish, allowing the restored peace to settle. The young man who had stood up to Elder Wei approached him one last time, holding the broken shovel, a gift perhaps, or a symbol of his failed courage. "Will you return?" the youth asked, his voice filled with the hope that only a hero can inspire. Jujin smiled, a rare fleeting expression that softened the hard lines around his eyes. "My path is endless, my friend, but remember this lesson. Courage is the first step, and refinement is the last. Brute force is never the answer. True mastery is when your greatest weapon remains sheathed, or when its full destructive potential is contained by a single inch of restraint." He then vanished, slipping into the deepening shadows as silently and effortlessly as he had arrived. The news of the incident spread quickly through the Zhonghu, the world of martial arts. Other masters did not focus on the defeat of Elder Wei, for many could defeat him. They focused on the how, the complete neutralization of a powerful strike without collateral damage. They realized Jujin had fought not with his body, but with his philosophy, demonstrating a level of control few believed existed. The true fear of the martial world was not the power of the fury, but the iron will required to hold back that destructive tide. Jujin had proven that he was no longer merely a talented swordsman, but a grand master of the highest moral order. His technique was complete, his spirit untainted by unnecessary killing, and his destiny cemented in the chronicles of martial history. He continued his solitary journey, forever seeking the next threat, forever ready to draw his blade. Yet he hoped that the lesson of the Wuling Mountains would resonate, that the pursuit of power is secondary to the pursuit of wisdom. The greatest victory is not over your enemy, but over your own destructive capability. The vast world lay ahead, filled with dark sects, misguided masters, and simple, good people in need of quiet protection. And Rujin, the master of the 1 inch of fury, was ready for it all. The path of the wandering swordsman is long, and the true meaning of Wuxo, martial heroes, is found in the choices made in moments of supreme power. Discover more tales of legendary skill and moral mastery in the ancient kingdoms. Like, share, and subscribe to Storycraft Studio.